Please give a warm Georgia Tech welcome to our esteemed guest, Becky Blalock.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I am so excited to be with all of you. This room was filling up, and I thought, yes, these people are so excited to hear me. And then I learned that you guys are getting credit for coming here. So anyway, I hope we'll have some fun in the next hour. I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about myself. I'll talk about some of the messages that are in my book. And then what I want to do is concentrate on answering questions that you might have. I did spend 33 years in corporate America, and as a little girl growing up, that's not exactly where I ever dreamed that I would end up being. It was a wonderful journey, but I kind of got there by accident. I went to 4 high schools, 3 junior highs, and 8 elementary schools. We moved around a lot when I was growing up. And I went to college to be a social worker, and happened to end up doing a internship with a marketing professor. I was working 3 jobs and putting myself through undergraduate school, making $1.65 an hour. And they had posted a job, it was $5 an hour. I mean, that was unheard of. This was in the 70s. And so I jumped at the chance to do this internship. And what I experienced was really incredible. This marketing professor that I worked for had me doing market research, and I learned that I could take large amounts of data and see trends. And he was fascinated by that. He said, you really ought to go into business. And I said, I don't really know anything about business. Nobody in my family's ever been in business. My dad was in the Air Force. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. But I said, I'll take a couple of marketing courses. And I did. And I was the only girl in the class. I thought, well, I like these odds. Anyway, I stayed in business and then got recruited right out of school by Georgia Power Company from the college placement office. And it wasn't my ideal job. I have to tell you, the world was in a lot of turmoil in 1974. Inflation was at double digits. Interest rates were around 20%. And the oil embargo had happened. Gasoline prices were just through the roof. And I was one of the few people to come out of school and even have a job. I thought, well, I'll take this till something better comes along. And lo and behold, I was there for 33 years. And the data says that your generation's not going to do that you'll probably move around a lot, have 4 or 5 different jobs. And I'm even seeing that with my own daughter. She's been out of school. She actually got a pharmacy degree from UGA. Don't hold that against me. And worked for Wellstar, and now she's already at Emory in a short period of time. And so she's been there 2 years already talking about what she's going to do next. So I see this happening with your generation. But I will tell you, there's a lot to be said for working for a big corporation, because I think they made me who I am today. As somebody that came out of college and didn't know anything about business, and I was given an awful lot of opportunities. My first job was in the accounting management training program. Now you know why I didn't think this was so exciting. I'm going to be there very long. But after my training, they sent me out to Americus, Georgia. Does anybody know where Americus is? A little small town in South Georgia. And when you're 22 years old, single and fresh out of college, it's not exactly where you want to be. But, I look back and I think how valuable that experience was, because my job was to supervise the meter readers and the customer service reps. And it's not very often when you come right out of college that you get that opportunity to lead others. And so many times people would take jobs in the corporate office, and it would be years before they'd get to manage anybody. Everybody said, well, this is a smart person. They have accomplished a lot, but can they manage and lead others? Because it is a different skill set to do that. And I got to do that coming right out of school. And then the next move up was to be a district accounting supervisor. And so you had to interview for those jobs, and I got out and I interviewed for jobs, and it was pretty clear that they were not ready for a woman to do that job at that point in time. Every time I interviewed, I was the only woman interviewing. And the last interview I went on was in a town called Thompson, Georgia. Anybody from Thompson in here, Thompson, Georgia, near Augusta? And a friend of mine got the job, and he said, Becky, it was just a joke when you came and interviewed. He said, you had the most experience, you were the most qualified, but they were not going to put a woman in that job. So I thought, well, I'm going to go back to Atlanta, go to the corporate office, go back to school at night and get my MBA. I'm not going to let it get me down So I did. I was working full-time as a financial analyst and going to school at Mercer at night. In those days, there were only two places you could get an MBA. One was at Georgia State and the other one was at Mercer. Today, I look at the opportunities that you guys have. You can do online MBA. You know, there's, I don't know, probably 12 different schools you can choose from, but those were the two options. And I didn't really want to go to Georgia State because downtown Atlanta was not a safe place, and I had several friends who'd been mugged. And I could go to Mercer and just pull up my car and walk right into the class. So after I finished that, I had the opportunity to become a person who was over the finance department, and we were issuing record amounts of billions of dollars of financing to pay for our first ever nuclear plant. Now the second two units of those first two are what you hear in the news about today. You hear a lot about Plant Vogtle. Well, I worked on the financing for Vogtle 1 and 2. And I was in a situation where I felt like I was doing a good job and getting all this feedback about being a top performer. And but yet, every time I interviewed for a job, I wasn't getting it. And we still didn't have very many women in the company at the time. And I tell people, not that that was a disadvantage. You know, the truth of the matter is, being a woman, I stood out. You know, people noticed me. Yeah, they probably scrutinized me more than ever, but they noticed me and knew who I was because I was the only woman many times. And I had the opportunity to work on a special project with a senior executive in our company. And we worked on a very tough assignment. Nobody else wanted it. I raised my hand, said I would do it, and we did a great job. We had such huge success that he called me up afterwards. He was asked to present to the board of directors, said, I want you to help me pull together that presentation. And so we're working on the presentation, and he says, you know, you've got a lot of talent. You know, what job do you want next in the company? And I said, well, my boss ever moves on, I'd kind of like to have his job. And he says, no, I'm not talking about the next job. He said, I'm talking about ultimately in your career, where do you want to be? And I said, guess what? I don't know. And he said, well, you need to think about it. He said, because you're qualified for that job now. And he said, what you need to be thinking about is that job long-term down the road that you want. And you need to have a plan for how you're going to get there. And you need to be working on that job now and not thinking about just that next job. And I have to tell you, that was what I call a pivotal moment in my career. Because even now, I mentor a lot of young people. And the first question I ask people is, well, what is it you want to do in your career? And you know what I hear? What do you think I hear? I don't know. I don't know. And I want to say, you know, well, my crystal ball's not working too good today. You know, only you can figure out what success looks like for you and what it is that you want to do. And in today's world, there isn't anything you can't make happen if you can get clear about what it is that you want. So that's kind of in my book. The first message is you got to begin within and think about what it is that you want. And I was 12 years into my career before I understood that. Anyway, this executive, when I told him that, he said, go off and think about it and come back to me. So I had kind of grew up in accounting and finance, but the marketing people had all the fun in our company. That was the really exciting work. And I'm an extrovert, and I thought, wow, to be able to get out and interact with people all the time would be fun. But people didn't in those days cross silos. You started off in accounting, you went up the corporate ladder in accounting. You started off in marketing, you went up the corporate ladder in marketing. So I went in a week later, thought about it, told him I wanted to be a vice president of the marketing department. And that may not sound like such a big deal to y'all, but you have to understand that never in the 100-year history of my company had a woman ever been named a vice president of the company, period. And this whole idea of moving out of the silo, out of accounting and into marketing. But he didn't laugh me out of the room. He said, well, that's good. If that's what you want to do, then your plan, what you're going to do, needs to reflect that. And he said, there are a lot of things that you don't know, a lot of skills you're going to have. He said, let's make a list of all those things. And we did. We created a really long, exhaustive list. And I could have looked at that list and said, you know what? I think I'm pretty happy just staying right where I am. But I didn't. I took that list and I started working on it. And I kept in touch with him because he was a senior executive, and I'd say, hey, I just want you to know, those things we had on that list, I'm working on it. I'm making progress on it. And here's some things that you can do to help me if you happen to come across any opportunities for me. And lo and behold, over time, I did become the vice president of marketing. Then I became the senior vice president over IT. I left the company, I wrote a best-selling book, and now I'm serving on public company boards. So you know what? I wasn't thinking big enough. We never do. But you are young enough in your careers that the one thing I would say to you is think much bigger than you think you can, and get a plan for getting there. Because you're 68% more likely to do something if you have it written down. It'll keep you focused. You know that's true. You go to the grocery store to get something. If you don't have a list, do you get everything on the list? Some of you might, because I got to tell you, y'all are at Georgia Tech, and I'm sure there are a few people in here probably have a photographic memory. I'm not one of them. But I think that's the first secret to helping you accomplish what you want to. Have any of you ever heard of Napoleon Hill? Okay, good. Napoleon Hill did some research back in it was 1920s. In the 1920s, he interviewed 500 of the most successful people at that point in time. Now, he did this without internet and, great air travel like we had to. It took him a long time. It took him 25 years to interview these most successful people. And he wrote this book called Think and Grow Rich. That's what he's known for. And after interviewing all of these highly successful people, he said the one thing they all universally had in common is that they expected themselves to be successful. And so I ask you, are you expecting yourself to be successful? Because here's the thing. As human beings, you have somewhere between 65 and 70,000 thoughts in a day. You're talking to yourself a lot more than you talk to anybody else. You know that. Y'all are talking to yourself right now while I'm talking, evaluating whether or not you like what I'm saying. But what you may not realize is that 85% of those thoughts are negative, if you're a normal person. It's programmed into us. It's in our DNA. Our ancestors, who we evolved from, would not have survived if they had taken a lot of risk. So we're programmed to not take risk because, unfortunately, that's what's in the gene pool. And so you have to recognize when you're telling yourself not to do something and ask yourself, is this going to kill me? Let me give you an example of the things we do to ourselves, because we're not even conscious that we're doing this to ourselves. You walked into this room earlier this evening, and what did you do when you came in here? You looked across and said, who do I know? Who do I know that I can go sit next to? Did y'all do that? Some people are shaking their head no. Well, not everybody does that, but most people do. And how many times have you been in a room, maybe even 10 times bigger than this, and you wanted to ask a question, but you didn't raise your hand and ask the question because you thought somebody might think it was a stupid question? Y'all done that? I've done that. Or how many of you want to run for political office? Anybody here want to run for political office? Or have formed an action group here on campus to take on some challenge? Anybody in here done that? These aren't things that will kill you, but it's a missed opportunity to meet somebody new. It's a missed opportunity to learn something new. Because if you ask a question, even if it's not, if you don't have it's not the answer you thought, you could learn something new. And other people in the room might have that question. And it's a missed opportunity for leadership if you haven't gotten involved in organizing an action group. So I would just encourage you to think about the fact that you're having that conversation with yourself, telling yourself not to do something. Some of that's good. You want to remember, don't stick your hand over a candle flame, you'll get burned. Don't walk out in front of a moving car, you'll get hit. Those things will kill you. But so many of these other things won't. And truth of the matter is, that's how confidence is built, is by putting yourself out there and taking risk. And that's the second message that I had in my book, because you got to be willing to put yourself out there and do things that make you very uncomfortable, even when that noise in your head is telling you not to do it. I interviewed a lot of very successful women for my book. I actually interviewed an awful lot of men too. And I asked them a question. I said, if you had a young person come into work in your company today, what's the single piece of advice you'd have for that person for being successful? Over and over and over again, I heard the very same thing. They said, be willing to take risk. Be willing to do the things that scare you. Put yourself out there. You know, I've done a lot of work with MasterCard. And one of the things that I was talking to a group of women about is that MasterCard is struggling to hang on to their diverse talent. And I talked about a study that General Motors and HP had done on job postings. And they were wondering why more women weren't moving up in their companies. Women are a minority in both of those companies. And when they looked at the job posting system, do y'all know what that is now? Most companies have, well, you've got Monster Board out there where all kinds of companies post jobs now, but inside companies, they post jobs. And they said that they were hiring women, but women weren't moving up. So they were trying to evaluate what's the issue here. And they said that if a job had 10 criteria listed, if a guy met 4 of those criteria, they were pretty willing to put their name out there, go for the job. And how many of those criteria do you think women had to have? 9 to 10, 9 to 10. And I don't care who you are. I mean, sometimes there are men that won't put themselves out there. They don't have all those boxes checked. You got to go for it regardless of whether or not you meet all those criteria, because your college education only gets your foot in the door. What really qualifies you for those senior jobs is the experience you get on the job. And if you're not willing to step out and try that and get that experience, then somebody else will be. And they'll get that experience and they'll be ready to move up the ladder before you. And really, once you try something once, it builds your confidence and you're ready to do the next thing. You know, I sometimes tell this story, but I had the opportunity to lead this thing called Red Carpet Tour Georgia, where we bring CEOs in from all over the world, take them on the tour of different cities in Georgia in the hopes that they'll bring a manufacturing facility or a headquarters here. And because I was the chair, you know, I had to kind of lead everything that was going on. And it's the first time a woman had ever led the tour, so that was a big deal too. That was a little intimidating. And we went down to Fort Benning. And you know, one of the things Fort Benning in Columbus is known for is they train all the paratroopers for the military. And I have a terrible fear of heights, terrible fear of heights. And so they said, we're going to let all of you go up here and jump out of the paratrooping tower. Anybody here ever done that? Well, I just got to tell you what, from the ground, I'm thinking, that ain't that big a deal. So we had to climb the stairs up to the very top. We got to the top, and everybody's cheering for me to go because I'm the chair, and they want me to go out first. And I thought, well, this still is not that scary, but then they hook you up, and you can't feel any tension behind you. And I went out and I looked, and I thought, oh my gosh, there's no way I can do this. And the guy tells me, he goes, just focus on the horizon. And I told him, I said, listen, I'm trying to talk every excuse to get back out of there, get out of that harness. I said, I have a small child at home. I really have no business doing this. And he said, no, just go out and stand on the deck and look at the horizon. Don't look down. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to do that, but there's no way I'm jumping. I get out there and I'm looking, and he took his foot and stuck it in my back and pushed me out of that tower. And I screamed bloody murder, but then it caught. And then there was just this lovely ride down. And I got down to the bottom of the ground. I thought, I went back up and did it again. But that's kind of the way it is with these things that are scary. You have to put yourself out there and try things. And that's why the title of the book is Dare, is that you got to be daring if you want to be successful. I don't care what it is. If you're not going into corporate America, if you're going to be a teacher, whatever it is, if you want to reach your full potential, you are going to have to do everything you can to dare to get out there. And then I did a lot of research on, okay, everybody says dare, everybody says take these risks, lean into all this stuff. How do you do this when you got this noise in your head telling you not to? And so, the two things that I think help with that, number one is to recognize you're having this conversation with yourself and get a grip on it, because only you control that. And when you're trying to talk yourself out of something, sometimes the best thing to do is to talk to somebody else. And I do think that you'll never reach your full potential in life if you don't have other people helping you. So that kind of brings me to the third message that's in my book, and that's that it's all about who you surround yourself with. You know, everybody thinks that, you know, being the most technically competent person is what's going to help you be successful in your career, and it's not. EQ is much more important than IQ, and particularly the higher up the ladder you go, the more the job is about other people and who you surround yourself with than it is about you. In fact, they say that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So who are you spending the most time with? Are they people that challenge you and support you and make you feel good about who you are, or are they a bunch of whiners? Because if they're a bunch of whiners, you might need to think about changing your network out. If they whine, you're probably whining too. We're very influenced by the people around us. If you want to be a better tennis player, what do you do? What do you do? Hang out with Serena. That's right. You hang out with somebody better than you are. And careers are the same way. You've got to identify who are these stars that you can surround yourself with and learn from. And be very open to feedback. You know, I interviewed a lot of men for my book, and what's interesting is I asked them, I said, if you could change one thing about women in the workplace, what would it be? And they said, quit taking it so personal. They said, you know, if I don't even want to give a woman any feedback because she'll get mad at me and won't speak to me for a week at the time. And I felt like saying, well, you might want to think about how you wrap that feedback. You know, I think we can all take feedback if it's given in a spirit of, you know, I care about you, and here's something that I saw you do you could maybe do better. But I also think, you know, the lesson for women is be very open to feedback and ask for it, because that's the only way you get better. If somebody criticizes you, don't take it as criticism, take it as feedback. And it may not be the truth, but it's somebody's perception, so it's their reality of the truth, and it's something that you probably need to embrace. Be glad you know about it and work on it. I used to get a lot of feedback from people that I was not a good listener. You know, we do these 360s in corporate America, and, you know, rather than looking at all the good things people say, everybody tears through and gets to that page where they give you that feedback. And mine would always say, she needs to be a better listener. And I got frustrated. I would read books on how to be a better listener, and I would really practice, and I would focus on it and think about it. And it wasn't until I actually got a coach, one of the people that's a friend of mine, to observe me. I said, tell me what I'm doing that makes people think I'm not a good listener. And I learned that there were really 2 things. Because I'm an extrovert, I'll sit in a meeting and people say, well, what do you think? Well, I'm the first one to say, well, here's what I think. And you can do that as long as you're not the leader of that group. Once you do that and you're the leader of the group, you know what you do? You shut everybody else down. The other thing that I do is my mind is just has 100 thoughts a day, and I would butt in on people. They'd be talking, but it's because I wanted to get that thought out really quickly. So once I became more cognizant of the fact that I was doing those things, I learned to sit back and, instead of telling people what I think, say, even if I thought I knew what needed to be done, to say, I don't know, what do you think? And you know what? It was amazing, the feedback that I would get that would change my thinking totally. So I would caution you, if you get into leadership roles, make sure that you're seeking input from a lot of different people, because 10 brains is a whole lot better than 1 when it comes to solving problems. And keep in mind that if you're the leader, no matter how much you try to flush out other people's thoughts, once you've said, this is what I think, people are not going to challenge you. And the other thing I did, because I'd have these thoughts coming out and I was butting in on people, I just disciplined myself to write down a key word. And then when people were through with their conversation, I would bring up what I thought. And then after I started practicing that, I didn't get that feedback anymore. But if you want to be a senior leader and lead other people, you've got to know what your weaknesses are. I always tell people you need to be very self-aware, and you need to know what are those 1 or 2 things that you have that are not strengths, and work on them every single day. Because you know what? You got them. Everybody does. Do you know what those are for you? If you don't, I would try to find out what they are. I would get some feedback from other people, and I'd put together a plan to work on them. I saw people get 15 years into their career, and they were walking around like the emperor or empress with no clothes on. Everybody said, oh, that person, you don't want them on your team. They don't listen. Don't be that person. Make sure that you're in tune with and self-aware of who you are in the workplace. And so I want to just go through those again. What I think is important is for you to figure out what success looks like for you. And it's not being the CEO in all cases, and that's fine, because only you can determine what success looks like for you. Put together that plan. The second thing is when you get that plan will give you a lot of courage and confidence to go after it. And don't let anybody tell you that you can't do something. If you make up your mind to do it and you want it, you can make it happen. And don't be so focused on the next job that you're not doing a good job where you are. Chris, who's here and worked with me at Georgia Power, reminded me of a little speech I used to give to people: be a star where you are. Because sometimes we would have young people who came in, and they come in day one and want to be the CEO. And I'm like, that can happen, but you got to have a track record of making things happen where you are. So always focus on being a star where you are. But be willing to step outside your comfort zone. Every single day on your way home, you should ask yourself, what did I do that scared me? What did I do that really put me out of that comfort zone? Because you know what? That's how you learn and you grow. And I will share this story just real quickly with you along those lines. Babe Ruth was the greatest home run hitter of his time. And what people don't remember, though, is that Babe Ruth led the league in strikeouts for many of those years. And he says those strikeouts where he failed were very important to helping him be successful. That he would get up to the plate, he would swing with all his might, and it would tell him how the weather was doing that day. They might need to adjust the next time. It would tell him how that pitcher was pitching, and maybe even how his own aches and pains were playing on that day. So think about that when you're putting yourself in a scary situation and you know that you may fail. That failure's not failure, it's just feedback. And it teaches you how to be successful on the next try. And then investing in relationships. There are so many events like this that people can come to and get to know other people. And I'm amazed at the people that don't take advantage of it. I can always tell you, when I go inside corporations and they have a resource group and I come in and speak, I can tell you who's going to be successful. It's not only the people that come to events like that, it's the people that come and that lead it. I'll tell you, the young people that I met right before this event who are coordinating this event today, it's a lot of work to put on something like this. They're getting to know each other. They're exhibiting leadership, and I can tell you they're all going to be successful way beyond Georgia Tech. And so I would ask you, are you just coming to events like this? Or are you rolling up your sleeves and getting involved in building relationships? If not, get involved. Get on a committee. And it's the same way when you get inside companies. Big companies are, they're like an animal in and of themselves. And the more people you know, the more you can navigate and get things done. And even if you're working for a startup, you got to have relationships with people that can help you raise money. You got to have relationships with people that can help you get inside a company and sell that product. It becomes all about who you know. And so hopefully those three little messages will help you be successful here at Georgia Tech, but even more so, we're on that next journey out of here. So what I want to do now is pause and take some questions from those of you in the audience. Who's got a question?
Real quick, please remember this session's being video recorded, so if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll bring you a mic.
Well, we'll just start off. I know this gentleman right here had a question. You want to ask your question first?
I'd be happy to ask.
All right.
Would you please comment on the advice that's often given to women that in order to succeed in a man's world, you have to behave like a man?
Well, I disagree with that. I think that authenticity is very important. I think you do need to understand the rules of the game, and you need to understand how decisions get made in any environment that you go into. But you don't. I don't play golf. I probably missed out on a lot of networking because I didn't play golf. But I saw more people fail because they tried to be something they weren't than people who tried to be themselves. So I think you should dress, the number one reason why young people didn't get hired coming out of college last year, according to ADECA, is because they didn't dress appropriately for the interview. And so I would encourage you to think about how people dress and think about how people act and what the hierarchy is on how decisions get made. You got to figure all that out and operate within those norms. Every company has its own culture. And it's very important to understand how that culture is. And some companies, I worked in a company where the culture was you didn't challenge authority. Or if you did it in a very respectful manner. I'll just share this story with you because I think it could be a great lesson for any of you. I don't care if you're a man, a woman, whatever. I reported to an EVP who reported to the CEO of the company. And I found myself in a situation where if I said the sky is blue today, they'd say, no, it's purple. And so I had a coach work with me. And the coach went and interviewed my employees, interviewed customers, interviewed the two of them and came back. And she said, you got a big problem. And she said, it's really not your problem. She said, you get it very fast, and you scare the living daylights out of them. She said, you're like a bull in a china shop. She said, when you go in there, you're going in saying, these are the 10 things we need to do. She said, you need to change that. She said, you need to adjust your style and go in. And she said, you don't go in and ask for help. She said, you should go in and ask for input. That was very powerful. It's just a little change in my behavior. And I found that when I went into my boss and said, you know what, my group is struggling with something, and before I do anything, I wanted to get your input on it. And invariably he would say, well, what do you think? And I would say, well, I don't know, I really don't know what you think, but here's sort of what I think. And he would always say, well, I agree with you. What can I do to help you? Who knew? Who knew it was so easy? And you're young people. And I got to tell you, young people are threatening to older people, to my generation. We want to think we know it all because we've been there for so long, but truth of the matter is we don't. Sometimes they'll talk about millennials and Gen X. Oh, those kids, they don't want to work. And I'm like, let me tell you something. They don't have to work like we did. They are 10 times smarter than we are. They grew up with this technology. They know how to do stuff so quick that would take me, 10 hours to sit down and do. And they're going to be threatened by you. And so you're going to have to learn, how do I, adjust my behavior to make these people comfortable with me? I hate to tell you that, but that's the way it's done. I gave that feedback one time. A young woman told me, she said, well, I'm just not going to compromise who I am. I said, I'm not telling you to compromise who you are. I'm telling you, be more sensitive to who you have to interact with and to the culture of the organization and to how you may be coming across to other people. So if you are a young person, you get it very fast, just know that you may have some people that are threatened around you, and you're going to have to be sensitive to that and how you go about getting your message across. Yes, it is more work to do that, but in the long run, you'll end up getting the answer that you want. Anybody want to challenge me on that? You think I'm wrong about that? I always like differing opinions. You coach a lot of young people. What do you think? You think that's bad advice?
Do I think what?
That's bad advice, that sometimes...
I do not think that's bad.
Okay, all right. Now, he's asked a question. Who else wants to ask a question? Y'all want to get that credit now, don't you? Okay.
You talk about reaching out and talking to coaches. How do you determine who your coaches are going to be or who would help you best?
I got to tell you what's interesting is, first of all, mentors are very important. And mentors do not have to be somebody that's higher up than you in an organization. My best mentors, I'll just give you this example. I became the CIO, and I didn't know that much about technology. So I used to spend some time every month going down and meeting with my folks on the front line that were the architects that were designing where we were headed with technology in the future, and who were visiting MIT and looking at all the technology. And it did two things. Number one, I learned so much from them. And then they would go tell everybody, Becky didn't grow up in IT, but boy, she sure spends a lot of time trying to learn our business. And people appreciated that, and I think they worked hard because they knew that I cared. So I always caution people that mentors may not always be somebody higher up than you. They may be somebody lower than you, somebody in another organization that, maybe you don't know a lot about HR. And so you need somebody that works in the HR department to sort of give you the background. I'm spending a lot of time right now. I'm sitting on the compensation committee for one of the boards I'm on, and I didn't grow up in HR. But the head of HR for Southern Company is a good friend of mine. And so I talked to her about, tell me about these peer groups that we benchmark ourselves against. So they're all around you. I think people are very willing to help you. You just need to be willing to ask. There are a lot of mentoring programs out there. People want to help young people. And I have to tell you, every time I mentor a young person, they end up mentoring me. Because you guys know so much about technology. And I know enough to be dangerous. And every time I get with one of my mentees, I'm like, can you come in here and fix my computer for me? And so I just learn things about fashion. I mean, it's amazing the things I learn when I mentor somebody. A sponsor is a totally different thing. And if you want to really be successful in any major company, you're going to need a sponsor. The bad thing about that is you kind of have to be picked. And a sponsor is somebody who sits around the decision-making table and picks who's going to be that next rung of leader in a company. Things may change a little bit, but I still see this happening a lot. And I never understood this until I became a senior executive. Because what happens is the higher up the ladder you go, the pool of people that are candidates for the next job up, everybody's competent. Any one of the 5 people can do the job. The person that gets the job is the person that people trust the most. And that's why one thing I encourage people to do, don't ever compromise yourself for anybody, any reason, any time. When your reputation is gone, you will never get it back. I've seen people try to recover. I've seen companies try to recover. It's very difficult, so just don't go there. Because the single most important ingredient in any relationship is trust. If you've ever done anything to compromise that, you won't get it back. And you know, most people will tell you, well, I'm trustworthy. But yet, they'll sign up and RSVP to come to an event and not show up. Or they'll tell somebody that they're going to do something and something else comes up and they don't. Those things either build or take away from trust. If you tell somebody you're going to do something, do it. And if you RSVP to come somewhere, and I guess my daughter's getting married at the end of this month. That's why I'm so focused on RSVPs. I'm like, get these RSVPs in. But your generation's really bad about that. But people will look at you and determine whether or not you're somebody that can be depended on to follow up on things. Who else got a question? Yes.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to ask, if you're leading a team, how do you create an environment and a space where you know that you can ask them for feedback and they'll give you honest, real feedback?
Well, the first thing you have to do is when people do give you feedback, don't react to it. You know, don't say, well, that's not true. Thank people when they do give you constructive feedback and ask for it. When I was named the CIO at Southern Company, the feedback I was given, they said, these people hate each other. They are not a team. And we need somebody who did not come from this team to come in and lead them. That's the environment that I inherited. So, and the former person that had been in that job played people off of each other. And I came in and I said, look, we don't have time for game playing. There is too much stuff going on. We are under fire. And I said, I'm going to hold you accountable for being team players and supporting each other. And I said, I'm going to start with me, where every 6 months we're going to assess each other. Every one of us is going to give feedback to the other one about, we're going to tell each other 1 or 2 things we like about what we do, and then 1 or 2 things that we like that we don't like about, where this person can improve. And we're going to rate each person on a scale of 1 to 10 how well we are. And so I think it goes back to accountability, to the leader holding everybody accountable. And if somebody would come tell me something bad about someone, I'd say, well, have you told this person that? You need to tell them first, then come talk to me about it. You know, you kind of set the tone for what's tolerated and what's not. And if you really force people to be accountable to each other as a team, and we set up this whole teamwork thing where we held each other accountable as a team and scored each other and talked about it. You can build a great team, but it became all about this idea of trust. So I hope that's helpful. Yes.
Okay, so picking off of that, how do you tell someone either higher up or a peer or something that negative feedback in a way? Like, how do you manage that without when you're still going to be able to like work with them and everything?
Well, I think this is, honestly, I asked the women that I interviewed for my book, I said, if you could go back in time and change one thing about your career, what would it be? And I heard a lot of different answers, but the number one answer I heard is that they did not deal with a performance issue as quickly as they should have. That's the most difficult thing you deal with in the corporate world, is that emotion. I was talking to somebody that works in HR with Georgia Tech earlier, and she said, what's the most difficult thing you've ever had to do? And I said, it's all the HR stuff, the people stuff, because it's not black and white, and you're dealing with somebody's life. And a lot of times people are just in the wrong job, and nobody's coached them and mentored them and helped them get to the right place. And sometimes the right place is not in the company. Sometimes they're just in the wrong place. They need to go do something else. But these women talked about the fact that it almost derailed their careers because they waited too long to deal with it. And I think that's what happens is that, you know, I know men are compassionate too, but women are extremely compassionate when it comes to dealing with performance issues, and we want to give everybody every chance in the world to be successful, but sometimes being successful means you need to go somewhere else. And so it's tough. And I will tell you that most companies are not very candid with people. I worked in a company where people walked around, they had something wrong with them for 15 years, and nobody sat them down and told them. But I think you have to create an environment where people know that you're doing it in their best interest. When I got this job in IT, I sat down with every single person I interviewed a lot of people, and then I called them in, and I said, here's what I've heard about you. You know, you do a great job. You're a tremendous leader on this team. I'm so excited about working with you. But here's something I want you personally to work on, and I'll help you. And they freaked out. They thought I was going to fire them. I wasn't trying to fire them. I was trying to help them reach their full potential. And it wasn't until I had worked with these people for about a year that they understood that only somebody really that cares about you is going to tell you the truth, tell you these painful things. And so embrace it. I really learned that if somebody called me up and gave me some constructive feedback, I need to say, thank you so much. You know, I'm going to really work on that. Even if it wasn't something that was accurate, it was just that one person's perception, to take it into consideration that that's something that maybe you could weave in. I tell you, anytime I speak, I always ask for feedback. Did I say something stupid? Did I say something that offended people? And you know what? Sometimes I do. So I've learned sometimes what not to say. And people will give you feedback if you ask for it and you're open to it. It's more difficult when you walk into a situation where people have never been told the truth. But in corporations today, there's just so much going on. People don't have time for all this game playing. They need somebody to be candid and direct with them. And I know that the people that are going to be the most successful are the ones that take feedback to heart and really work on it. It's how you become the best that you can be. Next question. Yes.
You knew I'd ask. In your book, you write, self-confidence is as much a learnable skill as it is a deep-seated character trait. For the women and men in this room that are soon to be interviewed, what can they learn in the short period of time between now and that scary interview?
Well, here's the thing. We teach people how to be better public speakers. We teach them how to be leaders. We don't teach them how to be more confident. And the confidence is all about being prepared for it and being willing to put yourself out there, and even if you fail, learning something from it. And what's wonderful is now you guys have the internet, and it tells you what questions most companies are going to ask. So go out and look and see what questions they're asking. The other thing I tell people to do is think about not what they're going to ask you, but what you're going to tell them. Think about how wonderful you are. What's great about you? Why would you be good for that job? I have to tell you where I learned that is I got trained as a witness to testify before a regulatory body. And they said, regardless of whatever they ask you, you tell them what you want them to know and don't answer the question. And you know, I have to tell you, it is amazing. It works. The politicians know this. You watch, they'll ask them a question. They don't answer the question. They'll tell them what they want them to know. So think about what it is that you want them to know about you and how wonderful you are and why you should be in that job regardless of what they ask. You can find a way to fit that in if you're clear in your mind about those things before you go in the interview. The other thing is dress appropriately. You know, Adekov did that study I talked about earlier. The number one reason why people weren't hired going into a job is the way they were dressed. You are so judged by what people see on the outside. You're going to make a first impression in the first 3 seconds. Make sure it's a good one, because it's very hard to overcome a bad one. Eye contact is so important. You know, they said people came in the interview and they're looking all over the ceiling and not looking at them. Eye contact builds trust. You don't want to just stare at somebody, because that, you know, then that can be a little intimidating. But make comfortable eye contact. Make sure you have a good handshake. I want y'all to turn around and shake each other's hands right now. Right now. Shake the person's hand next to you. Y'all not shaking hands. You got to shake hands. Quit studying for the next class. You're not going to get points for coming. I have to tell you, nobody wants that limp fish, and nobody wants a grip. Get that right. Get that right. The other thing is put your devices away. I could not believe it when I read it. It said people were checking their devices in the middle of the interview. Don't even take it in there with you. Don't let it ring while you're in there. Don't take it in there. And I'm sure y'all are all going to do great, because you got Georgia Tech on your resume, and Georgia Tech is, you just say that and people are like, this is a smart person. They know that. So what you got to do is convince them that you got the interpersonal skills to be able to get along with other people to get the work done, because you're not going to do anything in a vacuum when you get hired by these particular companies. So I hope that's good advice. Yes.
So based on your own experience and, you know, all the women that you have mentored and, you know, you've interviewed for your book, what are some of the major reasons that prevent women from reaching to the top? Because we know that there's still very little representation of females at the, you know, higher levels. So what are some of the reasons based on your
Well, you know, here's the thing. For the longest time, you didn't have women in the pipeline. When I came out of college, 15% of graduates were female business majors. I think engineering was 3%. So you didn't have people that were in business getting the qualifications and getting the skills and being qualified. Okay, now fast forward to today. Most of the people coming out of college today in business are women. Engineering is still, you know, I think maybe 40%. So we're going to have more women that get there, but the first thing is we had to get people that were qualified. The second thing that's happening is that this whole idea of women not being willing to put themselves out there. You know, thinking that you have to have 9 of the boxes or 10 of the boxes checked. And some of that is because women still do not have the same social safety networks that men do. You know, there's a lot of informal stuff that goes on in companies that females, and this happens to minorities too, are not included in. If you think a lot of business doesn't get done when people go off to lunch and play golf, you're wrong. And so that's why what I'm seeing happen that supplements that are some of these resource groups that are happening. I spoke to one earlier today here on the Georgia Tech campus, and they're happening inside corporations all across the company. But what frustrates me is when women don't take advantage of it and don't come. And there's so many men who are bending over backwards to try to help women. What's really funny is I spoke at a big event in Dallas, Texas last week, and one of the men stood up and talked about the fact that you know, he was uncomfortable taking a woman to lunch. He didn't know how to network with women. And I said, well, they might not want to go to lunch with you either. You know, I said, there's other things you can do besides going to lunch. This whole Me Too movement is fascinating to me because there's good and there's bad to both of it. You know, the good is I think people are getting educated. Men don't wake up saying, let's see what we can do to make life hell for the women. Men, they want everybody on their team to be successful. They're just totally unconscious of sometimes the social networks that they have. And, but now with this Me Too movement, we've made men afraid. I mean, they said, I'm not going to hire a woman. I have had more people say I'm just not going to hire a woman because I don't want to be accused of, and I'm like, well, if you don't misbehave yourself, you won't have to worry about that maybe. But they're scared they're going to get accused. So we've gone almost too far with some of the stuff. But anyway, it's, I think that we're going to have a much more diverse workforce than we've had in the past. I think the most successful leaders are going to be people who know how to get the best out of everybody on their team, regardless if you're male or female or purple. And for women, it's taking advantage of these resource groups that are there. And when your company offers something like that, don't be somebody that doesn't come. You know, this event here tonight. Think about what a great speaker these people are missing out on that didn't come tonight. But don't just come to an event like this. Make sure you meet somebody. Make a friend, and make that friend be somebody who's totally outside your little clique that you hang around with. You'd be surprised what you can learn from anybody if you make the effort to open that door up and talk to them. You know, there's a woman who was the head of AT&T here in Atlanta, and she and I were on a panel together, and I thought she gave the best advice. Because really and truly, when you come to a meeting like this and you're meeting somebody, the tendency is to tell them all about you. The truth of the matter is, people could care less about you. They want you to be interested in them. And she was very much an introvert, and she said, you know, I have learned this little trick. When I go anywhere, she said, and I meet somebody, and I don't know anybody else in the room, she said, I always say to somebody, well, what do you do? And she said, when they tell me what they do, I go, oh, wow, that sounds like a really hard job. And she said, Betty, they just go on forever. She said, you can't shut them up. So anyway, I share that with y'all in the hope that maybe that'll help you in your networking. But show your interest in other people, and then it's amazing what you'll learn about people. But we're generally so interested in making sure they know who we are and what we think that we don't invest that time. And the thing about relationships is they're very transferable. You know, I always tell people, invest selfishly in your education. Get all the education that you can. Get all the experiences that you can, because regardless of the company you work for, you're going to take that with you. And relationships are the same thing. I worked with another executive at my company who said, why are you doing all this stuff outside the company? You know, you don't get paid for that. And I said, well, I do it because it helps me be better and more effective in my job. I learn the best practices at other companies. I bring them back here, and everybody goes, oh, she's so smart. Well, I'm not smart. I'm just copying what other people are doing. And when we left our jobs, she had no other opportunities. I'm going to tell you, I just stepped right out of that job into a million other things, fun and exciting. It's because I had a network. And those relationships are transferable. I networked with a group of CIOs here in Atlanta when I was in that CIO role, who frankly saved my career. We had a terrible thing happen at Southern Company. We hired a Georgia Tech intern, and we'd give them easy jobs, and one of them was to wipe our servers clean. Anybody here an IT major? Anybody in computer science? Anyway, we would wipe the servers clean before we turned them in off lease. Easy thing to do. Well, somebody didn't train the intern that you disconnect it from the network before you do that. And the intern deleted 80% of our corporate data. And I found out about this about 2 hours after it happened. And my infrastructure guy says, oh, you know, we're going to have it fixed. IT people are always saying, it's just going to be 10 more minutes. And he said, we're instituting our disaster recovery plans. We'll get it back up. And we had payroll that was going to be issued to 51,000 people the next day. And so we had to get all this back up and running for payroll. It didn't impact the flow of power because that was on a separate system. It didn't impact our call center, so we could talk to customers. But everything else, all the corporate data, all the HR stuff, everything was impacted. We had people sitting around doing nothing because their computers weren't working, and they were mad. And I don't really blame them. And so finally, my infrastructure guy comes back up an hour later, says 10 more minutes, and I said, they don't know how to fix this problem. I'm going to have to get on the phone and start calling other people. So I started calling other CIOs. I called this guy John Searle at GE. I called Dave Barnes at UPS. I called John Michelle Ayers at Coke, and they all said, good luck with that, Becky. It never happened here, but let us know how that goes. And finally, I reached this woman, Kristen Kirkconnell, at Atlanta Gas Light, and she said, oh, Becky, that happened to us. It happened 3 years ago. She said, a vendor did that to us. And I said, well, how long did it take you to recover? And she said, 3 days. I said, oh, my God, CIO will mean career is over. And she said, no. She said, that's not going to take you 3 days. She said, it took us 3 days to figure out how to solve the problem. She said, I can tell you quickly how to fix the problem. She said, you don't have enough storage. She said, you got to get more storage on your network because all that data coming back at one time is a huge surge. So I thought, okay, this is about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You do not go to Kmart or Walmart and buy this stuff. So I called EMC, who is my storage supplier, and I had a great relationship with this vendor too. And I said, I don't know what to do. We've got to get this equipment. He said, Becky, we don't have any of that in the Southeast. He said, it'll take us 2 days to get that equipment in. And I thought, we can't do payroll if we don't get this equipment. Anyway, he said, well, let me go work on this with my team, and I'll come back to you. In the meantime, I called my CEO, and I said, I need to let you know about a problem down here. And that's another lesson for you. People can handle bad news. What they can't handle is no news. You ever got bad news? Go to your boss immediately and give him the bad news. Because then he says, well, what can I do to help you? If anybody else had called him before I did, I probably would have been in trouble. Well, then the EMC guy calls him back and says, you're not going to believe this. He says, you're good friends with Steve Wright at Scientific Atlanta. We just delivered this equipment, this very equipment to him 2 days ago. And he says, we can take it out of their data center. It's not hooked up, and truck it into you overnight. So they trucked it into us overnight. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, we had it hooked up. All the data started coming back. And lo and behold, we issued payroll the next day. But had I not had that ready network already in place, these people I could call and say, if this ever happened to you, might have taken me 3 days like Kristen, and CIO would have meant career is over. So make those investments now. You know, there's always other people in companies going to have the same job you do. I'd be best friends with them. I would find, I'm getting ready to get cut off. I'd find out what they do that's really, you know, innovative and bring it back, and then you can be the star of the team. Well, anyway, I'd love to be in with y'all. I'll be around for a few minutes afterwards.
Thank you all so much for your questions, and thank you for coming. Let's give a big round of applause to Ms. Becky.
Thank you.